Sergei Lavrov likes to travel. And whereas it might appear that this tour of Africa is an example of time travel to a moment before the invasion of Ukraine, it's actually been this week. Yesterday it was Burundi with an uncompromising message on the wall.
Since the West insists that there is no other basis for resolving the Ukrainian situation except for the notorious Zelensky peace formula, and at the same time Zelensky's team threatens, after liberating, as they put it, the Crimea and the eastern regions of Ukraine, to start killing every Russian and destroy everything Russian there, the conclusion is very simple. The West directly supports the genocide.
And there was an insight into why many African countries have abstained from condemning Russia's invasion in UN votes and now receive Mr. Lavrov.
We have taken an abstentionist position, a position of neutrality, a position of non-alignment to prevent this conflict from reaching other regions, more specifically the African continent. We must mitigate the impact of this conflict, of this situation in Ukraine, in particular by taking a neutral position, and this is the position of most African countries on this issue.
And in South Africa, it's not just the minister getting a warm welcome. Last month, a Russian frigate docked in South Africa, a prelude to joint naval exercises with Russia and China. For those running the ANC, the long history of standing shoulder to shoulder with Russia in the anti-imperialist struggle outweighs what's happened in the past year.
If it was according to the ANC, we will want President Putin to be here even tomorrow.
You would?
To come to our country. But
you would welcome Vladimir Putin here right now?
Of course we will welcome.
A man who is being investigated for war crimes by the International Criminal Court.
We will welcome him to come here as part and parcel of BRICS, but we know that we are constrained by the ICC in terms of doing that. Putin is a head of state. Do you think that a head of state can just be arrested anywhere? How many crimes have your country committed in Iraq?
Now the question has arisen of inviting Vladimir Putin for a summit of the BRICS emerging economies planned for August, with South Africa saying it could give him diplomatic immunity to attend. What message would that send to the 130 plus other countries that signed the Rome Statute setting up the International Court?
The message is that South Africa would have been showing that it prefers its relationship with Mr. Putin to its relationship with all the member states of the Rome Statute. But it is important to ensure that this does not become a round two of what we experienced when ICC had issues with South Africa in relation to al-Bashir. Everyone must try hard to avoid that to be a redux of that situation.
Omar al-Bashir was the Sudanese leader previously indicted by the International Court, leading to an earlier row with South Africa. Whether or not President Putin risks a visit, South Africa already stands accused by America of sending arms to Russia on this ship, seen transiting the Bosphorus earlier this year. The opposition in South Africa suggests the ANC's position is less about being good comrades and more about cash.
I happen to think that we have been supplying arms to Russia, and I believe that the nexus between the Russian money and the ANC is what lies at the heart of that.
The South African opposition is now advertising its objections to the government's plans, and Western countries are too. But this summit is already revealing the gulf between many African nations and the West.
Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko says nations who are willing to join Russia and Belarus will be given nuclear weapons. This comes days after he confirmed the transfer of some tactical nuclear weapons from Moscow to Minsk had begun. Lukashenko, a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, made the comments in an interview on a Russian media company. He also said it must be strategically understood that both the countries have a unique chance to unite, while also stating no one minds Kazakhstan and other countries having the same close relations that Belarus has had with the Russian Federation. His comments on handing out nuclear weapons to like-minded allies are likely to heighten concerns at a time of growing global proliferation. To the possible rise in concerns, Lukashenko said if someone is worried, then it is very simple. They just have to join in the union state of Belarus and Russia. That's all. And there will be nuclear weapons for everyone. But it is still not clear how wide Lukashenko's invitation to join the union state extended. And he offered no other specifics. Although the Belarusian president was quick enough to say that it was on his own views and not that of the views of Russia, the proposal that he's making. Now, following his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko mysteriously took critically ill. The cause of his decline of health is yet to be identified. Lukashenko's political rival has now pointed a finger at the Kremlin, alleging that the leader has been poisoned. Belarusian opposition leader Sepp Kalu, a former candidate for the presidency and a former ambassador to the United States, took to Twitter late on Sunday to level allegations against Moscow. He claims that the specialists attending to Lukashenko deemed the leader to not be in a state to be transported back to his country. He further alleges that Moscow sent Lukashenko's private jet back to Minsk without him to mask his hospitalization. He says that Moscow has been aware of Lukashenko's deteriorating health for a while, and a political purge planned by Russia might be underway.
Dozens of Russian officials and oligarchs have visited Cuba in the last few weeks, signing agreements to supply oil, wheat, and revitalize Cuba's broken industries.
Del presidente Putin.
It's partly in exchange for Cuba's support of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And Cubans who don't agree, like Rolando Remedios, who was arrested for protesting Cuba's lack of free elections 2 years ago, say their government is in no position to haggle over terms.
They have no choice because this is a sinking ship. The Cuban economy continues to deteriorate.
Cuba is facing the collapse of its economy and its electrical grid.
Now the Russians come to Havana and they say, well, we're ready to help, but you would have to change your constitution, change your laws. And the attitude of the Cuban leadership is the attitude of a submissive lackey of a colonial power.
In the last 2 weeks, Cubans have appeared joining the Russian army and fighting alongside the Wagner Group in Ukraine. And the Cuban army signed a deal to train its troops in Belarus. Kremlin officials have been talking about the possibility of opening a new front in their confrontation with the West on this side of the Atlantic.
The message is mostly directed to the United States and to the Western allies, and saying if things really will get really wrong in Ukraine, we may go forward and to place some kind of a strategic equipment on the islands.
They are pushing us to the center of a geopolitical confrontation with NATO.
This former Cuban diplomat fears that could include nuclear submarines.
The worse that the war will go for the Russians, the more likely that this kind of military scenario might take place.
And in an era where Cold War dynamics seem to be repeating, many Cubans worry the temptation for Russia to use their island will be too strong to resist. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Ottawa.
All allies agree that NATO's door remains open, that it's only for allies and Ukraine to make decisions on membership. Russia does not have a veto. And all allies agree that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. And we all agree that the most important thing now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign and independent state.